Our inexperienced new Prime Minister Andy Burnham is already getting his sums wrong. Oh dear.
Watch how Kemi Badenoch launches a devastating attack on Andy Burnham, warning that Britain cannot afford what she calls small answers to enormous problems. From rising taxes and energy costs to defence, business and the future of Britain's economy, Badenoch delivers a brutal challenge. Is Burnham really ready to run the country? Is Britain actually moving forward? Or are politicians simply offering temporary fixes to permanent problems? Before we continue, hit like and subscribe to Britain Talk Daily for more explosive political coverage. Let's get into this. What if the biggest threat to a new Prime Minister isn't the opposition, but the expectations of an entire country that has simply run out of patience? That is the question hanging over Andy Burnham after Kemi Badenoch delivered one of her most aggressive attacks yet, because this wasn't just another political speech. This was a warning that Britain is facing enormous challenges. And according to Badenoch, the new government is simply not thinking big enough. And if she is right, the consequences could be felt by millions of ordinary people, families struggling with the cost of living, young people wondering whether they will ever be able to afford their own home, businesses deciding whether Britain is still the right place to invest, and workers watching opportunities disappear overseas. Kemi Badenoch began her attack by doing something unusual. She actually admitted that Andy Burnham appears to be a nice guy. She joked about his dancing. She even brought up the controversial question of how he makes his tea, but then the tone changed completely because Badenoch's message was brutally simple. Being a nice guy is not enough. Being popular is not enough. And making people feel good is not enough. The Prime Minister of the United Kingdom has to deal with some of the biggest challenges facing the country. And according to Badenoch, those challenges are enormous. Britain is dealing with international conflicts, hostile states are threatening critical infrastructure. Artificial intelligence is developing at an extraordinary speed. China and America are competing for technological dominance. The country faces demographic pressures. There is a continuing debate over immigration and border control, and millions of people are struggling with the cost of living. Yet, according to Badenoch, the government's response is focused on relatively small measures, cheaper bus fares, temporary help with energy bills, and a series of expensive policy announcements. Her question was devastatingly simple. Is that really enough? Because for ordinary families, the cost of living crisis is not about one bus ticket. It is not about saving a few pounds on one bill. The problem is much deeper. People are worried about the future. They are worried about housing. They are worried about jobs. They are worried about energy prices. And they are worried that their children may have fewer opportunities than they had themselves. Think about that for a moment. Imagine working hard every day and still feeling like you're falling behind. Imagine watching your children grow up knowing that buying a home could be completely out of reach. Imagine running a small business while taxes and regulations continue to increase. And then imagine being told that the solution is a small discount here and another temporary measure there. That is the frustration Badenoch is attempting to tap into. Her argument is that Britain does not need political band-aids. It needs fundamental change. And this is where her attack becomes even more serious, because Badenoch argues that every government promise eventually has to be paid for. Someone has to pick up the bill. It could be the taxpayer, it could be businesses, it could be working families. But according to her argument, the money does not simply appear. And that leads to one of the biggest questions she is demanding Burnham answer. Where is the money coming from? Badenoch argues that Burnham has announced a series of ambitious ideas without explaining clearly enough how they will be funded. And in British politics, that is a dangerous accusation, because voters remember what happens when governments make promises that later turn into tax increases. They remember budgets that fail. They remember businesses cutting jobs. They remember investment disappearing. And they remember politicians insisting that everything will be fine until suddenly it isn't. That is why Badenoch repeatedly returned to the economy. Her argument is that Britain cannot simply spend its way to prosperity. According to her vision, the country needs to create wealth first. Businesses need to invest. People need jobs. Young people need opportunities. And Britain needs to become a place where companies actually want to build factories, hire workers, and expand. And then came one of the most powerful stories in her speech. Badenoch described an employer from Greater Manchester who was opening a new factory, but the factory was not being built in Greater Manchester, it was being built in America. The reason, according to Badenoch, was that taxes and regulations made it more attractive to operate elsewhere, and she claimed that the company was even recruiting British young people to take those jobs abroad. Now think about the emotional impact of that. A British business, British workers, British young people, but the opportunities are somewhere else. That is exactly the kind of story that can make people angry, because nobody wants to see their country lose investment. Nobody wants to see young people leave because they believe they have no future at home. And nobody wants to believe that Britain is becoming less competitive. This is why Badenoch's message is aimed directly at people who feel that the system is failing them. She is saying that the answer is not simply to give people temporary relief. The answer is to fix the economy underneath. But then Badenoch turned her attention to Andy Burnham himself. And this may have been the most damaging part of her speech. She argued that Burnham is still behaving like the mayor of Manchester, but he is no longer the mayor of Manchester. He is the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. And those are two completely different jobs. A Prime Minister has to think about the entire country, not just one region, not just one group of voters, not just one political base. The Prime Minister has to think about national defense, energy security, artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, the economy, international competition, and Britain's place in a rapidly changing world. Badenoch's argument is that Burnham needs to lift his sights because the world is not standing still. China is not waiting. America is not waiting. Russia is not waiting. Technological competition is not waiting, and neither are the threats facing Britain. This is where the speech becomes more than a political attack. It becomes a battle over two completely different visions of Britain's future. Badenoch is arguing for lower taxes, cheaper energy, fewer regulations, and a stronger environment for businesses. Burnham's approach, as criticized by Badenoch, is presented as more focused on government intervention and public spending. And the question is, which approach will actually make ordinary people better off? That is the argument that will ultimately decide who wins, because speeches are powerful. Political attacks can go viral, Parliament can erupt, but eventually voters want results. They want to know whether their bills are becoming more manageable, whether their children can find good jobs, whether businesses are hiring, whether the economy is growing, whether Britain is becoming safer, and whether the government is actually delivering what it promised. Badenoch also delivered another warning about Burnham's cabinet. She argued that the government needs people with a broader range of experience. Her criticism was that too many people around Burnham come from political, trade union, charity, or public sector backgrounds. Her argument is that running a country requires experience beyond Westminster. It requires people who understand business, industry, technology, security, and the global economy. Again, this is where the political battle becomes much bigger than one speech, because if Badenoch's criticism is correct, Burnham's government will eventually have to prove that it can handle the complexity of modern Britain. And if she is wrong, then Burnham has the opportunity to demonstrate exactly that. But there is one thing nobody can deny. The pressure is now on. The public is watching. The opposition is attacking. And every decision the government makes will be judged. The question is no longer whether Andy Burnham can win an election. The question is whether he can govern. Because winning power is one challenge, keeping the confidence of the people is another, and delivering real change is perhaps the hardest challenge of all. Kemi Badenoch has made her position very clear. She believes Burnham is offering small answers to huge problems. She believes Britain needs bigger ambitions. She believes the government must focus on wealth creation, economic growth, national security, and long-term planning. And she believes that if the government fails to do that, ordinary people will ultimately pay the price. But now the responsibility belongs to Andy Burnham. He has the opportunity to prove his critics wrong. He can show that his policies are more than announcements. He can demonstrate where the money will come from. He can prove that his government has a serious plan for the economy. And he can show that he is ready to govern not just for one region or one political group, but for the entire United Kingdom. Because ultimately, this is not about Kemi Badenoch. It is not even about Andy Burnham. It is about the future of Britain. It is about whether young people can build a future here, whether families can afford to live here, whether businesses want to invest here, and whether Britain can remain competitive in a world that is changing faster than ever. So now I want to hear from you. Was Kemi Badenoch right? Are Andy Burnham Burnham's plans genuinely ambitious enough for the challenges Britain faces? Or is Badenoch simply playing politics and refusing to give the new government time to prove itself? Do you think Britain needs lower taxes and fewer regulations? Or do you believe the government should spend more to support ordinary people? And perhaps the biggest question of all, is Andy Burnham really ready to be Prime Minister of the United Kingdom? Tell us what you think in the comments below, because the political battle is only beginning. And if Kemi Badenoch is right, Andy Burnham's biggest challenge may not be winning the next election. It may be proving that his government can actually deliver. The promises have been made, the criticism has been delivered. Now comes the hard part, results. If you enjoyed this political breakdown, make sure you like this video and subscribe to Britain Talk Daily for more explosive political coverage, Westminster drama, major speeches, and the biggest debates shaping Britain's future. Turn on notifications so you don't miss our next video, because the battle over Britain's future is just getting started. Subscribe to Britain Talk Daily, and we'll see you in the next one.